afternoon, everyone. I hope you got an excellent lunch and good coffee or tea to prevent you from nap, and make sure that we can all jump in our third panel that will take us in a different part of the world after a morning between Africa and the Middle East. Now we're jumping into the Indonesian world, which is a world on its own. So we're going to have three fascinating papers. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Harry Bawono. Where is Harry? Here. Who will talk to us on East China and Islamophobic country, Belt and Road Initiative, and the battle of narrative within the Muslim community in Indonesia. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It is such an honor for me to present my research in this pressure forum. I am Harry Bawono, a researcher at Research Center for Religion and Belief, a National Research and Innovation Agency. And I will present research entitled East China an Islamophobic Country, Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and the battle of narrative within the Muslim community in Indonesia. This presentation has 7 main sections. The first is introduction and problem. The second one is conceptual framework. And the next is a method. Indonesia, Islam, and China, a complicated relationship. And BRI and Indonesia, nexus of Indonesia and China interests. Moderate and hardline Islamic on BRI and China, mapping narrative and tracing conflict, and the last is conclusion. In 2016, Indonesia became a part of the BRI. The first project in relation to this scheme is the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway projects. Additionally, China also enhanced cultural exchange by offering scholarship funding to Indonesian students. Considering that Indonesia is a multicultural country with various cultures and religion, it is home of 223 million Muslims, accounting for 87.2% of its population. Therefore, it is clear that BRI has implication for Indonesian religious life, beside its economic and political aspect. And additionally, the BRI has impacted religious life in Indonesia by linking it to the plague of Chinese Uyghur Muslim minority, which has caused friction within the Muslim community regarding the Uyghur issue. Previous studies on BRI, or One Belt, One Road initiative in Indonesia, has mainly focused on the economic, political, and defense aspect. And to fulfill the gap, this research aims to explore the narrative battle between hardline Islam and moderate Islam in Indonesia concerning the BRI and China. And this research utilized several concepts, including One Belt, One Road initiative, Islamophobia, battle of narrative, moderate and hardline Islamic groups. This research took place from April to June 2023. The data was collected using a digital observation method, which involved monitoring online news platform, including YouTube and other digital platforms such as TikTok and Facebook's videos. The collected data span the period from 2015 to 2023. This qualitative study was conducted within a constructionist paradigm. Data analysis was performed using the narrative analysis, specifically for Fairclough discourse analysis. Indonesia has a Muslim population of 223 million, with approximately 50.3% affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama or NU, and 14.9% belonging to Muhammadiyah. These groups commonly labeled as moderate Islam. However, approximately 35% is distributed among various groups, including FPI and HTI atau FPI or HTI, or not affiliated with any group at all. And the FPI and HTI usually labeled as hardline Islam. The moderate Islamic group, on the other hand, tends to support the government while retaining the freedom to voice criticism. In contrast, the hardline Islamic group position itself as the government's opposition. And currently, FBI and HTI are illegal organizations in Indonesia. In relation to Islam, the main three theories propose that the Arab, Indian, and Chinese people play significant role in spreading Islam across the Nusantara or Indonesia. It is no wonder that Chinese culture has had a notable influence in Indonesia. For instance, a Sino-Javanese Muslim culture developed across Java, and traditional attire like baju koko is associated with Muslim men's dress, while kebaya encim is worn by women in traditional dress. It is essential to note that Indonesia is home to the world's largest Chinese ethnic population outside China. However, the sentiment of anti-China has become a historical burden for many Indonesians, dating back to the incident from the colonial period to present day. Notable incidents include the Gadjah Pecinan incident, the tragedy following the 30 September movement, and riot in May 1998. Gadjah Pecinan incident in 1740. In this incident, the China and the Javanese community united to rebel against the colonial government. The Chinese community was massacred, and since then they were required to reside in separate clusters to prevent further unity. And the tragedy following the 30 September movement, 1965 to 1966, during which the massacre occurred targeting alleged communists and those accused of being communists, it is because the Communist Party was seen as having rebelled against the government at the time. As a result, many Chinese people fell victim to this event due to their association with communism. And the May 1998 riots, which erupted during an economic crisis, the issue of economic inequality among races, pribumi or local or non-pribumi or migrant, triggered the unrest with Chinese ethnicity being scapegoats and becoming victims of the riot. In this sense, the state also contribute to reproduction of the anti-Chinese sentiment to tackle this problem. Particularly after the new order, the government has reformed all regulations that amplify the anti-China sentiment. Now this illustrates that China and Indonesia share strong religious and cultural links. However, many Indonesians perceive ethnic Chinese as the other. And the term asing, instead of asing to represent the stranger in Indonesia, so we have the many Indonesians have a special concept to represent the Chinese with asing. So this anti-China sentiment seems to be a psychosocial element among many Indonesians. Unfortunately, this mindset can be easily manipulated by parties who wish to exploit it for their own purposes any given time. And in 2013, the administration of President Xi Jinping introduced the concept of One Belt, One Road, or OBOR in Indonesia, to the international community. Later, it was rebranded to BRI. Even though Indonesia joined the BRI in 2016, the formal agreement for extensive BRI projects between Indonesia and China sites was only signed in 2018. This aligned with President Jokowi's vision of the global maritime fulcrum. Since joining the BRI initiative in Indonesia has resulted 14 projects, one of which is the Jakarta-Bandung High Speed Railway project. becoming a trademark of BRI's project in Indonesia. Additionally, the new capital city Nusantara is another project with a close relationship to the BRI, even though it is not directly under the BRI scheme. Both China and Indonesia champion the global maritime fulcrum and BRI as they collaborate in fulfilling their own goals with a focus on connectivity that benefit for both of them. In this section, I will describe the narrative of each party using Verklo framework, which involve description, interpretation, and explanation. Description and interpretation will be done by presenting quotation from each party and categorizing this quote. Subsequently, an explanation will be provided to encompass the entire of this narrative. However, to be concise, I just described sample of the quotes. The Heartland Islamic faction believe that historically China once attempted to colonize Indonesia. During the Singasari Kingdom era, this signifies that China still harbor intention to conquer Indonesia now through the BRI. Furthermore, they are also convinced that One Belt, One Road or BRI is contradictory to Islam as they see it as a communist system. Therefore, Obor is perceived as politically and economically detrimental to Indonesia. Meanwhile, the moderate Islamic group firmly believe that historically China's intention was focused on trade and they never sought to colonize other nations. Furthermore, they perceive that harboring hatred toward the Chinese people is not justified in Islam, as the religion prohibits acting unjustly toward other nations, especially through the overgeneralization of certain individual behavior. Moreover, the moderate Islamic group is convinced that the current state government system are already in accordance with Islamic teaching. In other words, there is no need for another system, including a caliphate. In connection with this, Indonesia relationship with China should be positioned for the benefit of Indonesia. This is crucial because China has emerged as a new global power. The Uyghur case cannot be viewed as a religious issue. It is a political matter linked to extremism and separatism within a certain group of Uyghur Muslim. The clash narrative between this group become understandable when viewed within the context of several interconnected factors. These factors include the presence of anti-China sentiments, opposition movement against the Jokowi government, and the ongoing conflict between Heartland Islamic group and moderate Islamic group. Additionally, the trade war between China and the United States play a pivotal role in shaping this situation. In summary, the battle of narrative between this group can be observed in scheme 1 and 2. Conclusion. The BRI has a significant influence on the battle narrative between Heartland Islamic group and moderate Islamic group in Indonesia. In this narrative war, Heartland Islamic group convert the BRI and China issue into religious matters. They believe that communist China in all its forms embodies Islamophobia and tyranny. Take advantage to the government's ban on their two organizations. The Heartland Islamic group says the opportunity to increase support from the general public. Their goal is to fully formalize Islamic law or Khalifah or Khilafah and gain more public backing. On the other hand, the moderate Islamic group firmly view that BRI and China issue from a political and economic perspective. They affirm that BRI should bring advantage to Indonesia. Moreover, they oppose the narrative that demonizes China and the present Indonesian government as it aims to obstruct the agenda of the Heartland Islamic groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your fascinating paper and for keeping up with time, Harry. So next presenter will be Kamaruzzaman Ahmad, and talking about how the transformation of Chinese religiosity affects Indonesian culture.
Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum. Before I present my papers, it is really honor to inform you that today is our Independence Day. So that's why today, three of us wearing batik. This is our traditional batik to celebrate our Independence Day. And my presentation entitled "I Love Kung Fu Hustle Movie," which is really I love it. How the transformation of Chinese religiosity affects Indonesian cultures. Okay. This paper examines the influence of Chinese belief on cultural life in Indonesia. I think our brother just presents what happened in Indonesia with the Chinese influence. The existing the ethnic Chinese Indonesia is closely related to the history of this country for hundreds of years, including in my hometown in Aceh, which is west part of Indonesia. And then discussing Indonesian will not be in depth without involving ethnic China. Nenis Lombard has written books, Nusa Jawa, where he explains about the Chinese, Arab, Dutch, and West influence our country. Cultural relation become very important to understand because the life of a Chinese is very much related to their belief system in everyday life. The Chinese belief system tend to be implemented in their economic life as a family system. This is some pictures that I took. I know this is not really young. Some of our favorite actors, Jet Li. And yesterday I arrived with my hair. Due to my presentation, I saved. This become to showing people. So this is kind of our favorite movie actors in 19 or 2000s. The side of Chinese culture are evident the life of Indonesian people, including the influence of films screened in Indonesia. The figure of the artist from Chinese film get the attention of the Indonesian peoples. Cross-religious cultures. The unification process, I would not read the above because our brother just elaborate what I will talk about the influence of other country to our Nusantara life. The unification process of Indonesia to become a nation state can accommodate all the cultural and religious elements found in the archipelago within the framework of Indonesianness, religiousness, and modernity. This is the big bell. You see this one? This is in my hometown in Banda, Aceh. This given by what we call in Bahasa Laksamana Cengho. In the year of 1414, so there's a prison for our kingdoms in Banda Aceh, in Aceh at that time. So it's still in the Museum of Aceh, what we call the Lonceng Cakra Dunia. Chinese in Indonesia, sorry Ibu Amel, this is what we call in Bahasa not Tionghoa. Some people call it Cina Tok. Cina Tok means that origin from China. They married with China and then settled in Indonesia. And then the other word, Chinese Pranakan, married with locals. And then Medan Chinese atau Chinese Medan, this in North Sumatra, they control all of the business and trade in North Sumatra. And Bangka Chinese, Cina Bangka, this in Bangka Belitung. And Javanese Chinese, this mostly Chinese who live in Java Island. They speak in local language, Java. They're more Java rather than China. And Jakarta Chinese, who live in Jakarta, the capital city of Indonesia. which in fact sometimes the sentiment that people, China doesn't have control Indonesia too much for 10 of years since Indonesian independence. Chinese influence, the process of incorporating Chinese culture into the history of nation state at least give an impression how cultural accommodation was carried out in Indonesia. The influence of Chinese culture can be seen in the daily life of Indonesian people, from language, some Indonesian language now imported or adopted from China language, Lu Gue, that is from China, and then fashion, food, architectural issue, especially in the houses of worship. The influence of Chinese culture on socio-economic life is also unavoidable. The economic activity indigenous Indonesian have been dependent on the citizen of Chinese descent for decades. This is one of the, what we call in Bahasa, baju takwa. Baju takwa means the pious, good Muslim, fear of Allah. But the clothes is not from Arab, but it's from China. What we call it baju koko. And this is very special. When we going to the mosque, we use the baju koko, which is the Chinese fashion or Chinese t-shirt. So this become very famous in Indonesia when they perform salat or pray. They all of their fashion are coming from the Chinese symbol. Mosque. This is some mosque. That's when I travel from Banda Aceh to Merauke, 10,000 kilometers with my motorbike. Yes, for 4 months. Yeah, for 4 months with my wife. So my wife took my picture. That's the one of the Chambon mosque in the Kalimantan. So this all of mosque in Indonesia. I think that is like a Chinese model, and the influence of Chinese culture in Muslim worship building in Indonesia. All of them they call Masjid Chengho. Why do I like Chinese movie? So the younger generation in Indonesia has started to be familiar with life pious people who are smart in martial art, in Chinese religious cultural tradition. Sometimes the silliness of some players with the character they must present makes the message stronger in the Chinese films based on life in the temples. So we learn about the Chinese value through the movie from their temples. The appearance of film God as Gambler, you know, Chow Yun-fat, very smart in playing this one, tricks. And then Chow Yun-fat, Andy Lau, Stephen Chu. So the gambling is another part of Chinese side life, what we as a Muslim in Indonesia must watch, where the gambling is forbidden. Sorry. So we love that movie. Even in our religion, we can't do that. It is illegal. The same movie with, you know, the Journey to the West, Sun Gokong. All of the face that a pig, monkey, we have to watch that kind, because in Islam, this is like haram. But we enjoy not because of the actors or the face of their face, but because of value that transfer in that movie. So my student or our student in Indonesia should watch this movie, because that value in terms of like the movie Sun Gokong, or what we say in Bahasa Kerasakti. The film of the God must be crazy in China also, give a theological feel. The God must be crazy in Africa. I think God is not crazy, but this gives us a very like, you know, theological way of thinking in terms of how the Chinese movie can go to our home in Indonesia by giving something that beyond of our belief in our traditional way. Yes, that's almost finished. The fight scene using Kung Fu martial art is also favorite movie. This before coming Kush Kush Hotahi, Kabigusi, Gabigam, Tum Hiho, and other Indian and now Korean and many of Hollywood. Every good fought by the main character always win at the end of film story. So the good thing always win, except the Andy Lau. Most of Andy Lau movies give us not like a bad ending. We sometimes cry. Why? because of his love to, I don't know, maybe that's how the Andy loves charisma in Indonesia when we adapt his style of hair. Yeah, in Indonesia, we use the Chinese model of hair. And then we are presenting the life Shaolin temple in this film. Sometimes this film are presented with comedy plot. But costume always use monk. The monk that we always thinking, but the costume, the monks, that's only for temples, very sacred place. But sometimes we saw this in the movie. The good value that must win at the end of film are combined with the visual message displayed in the life of the monk in the temples. Kung Fu Hustle. I hope you already watched this one. Every month, Indonesian television they will air this. And we are waiting for how that comes. Stephen Show. The hilarious characters shown by the actor in the film also give the impression of that key understand the Chinese culture context, the figure shown at the end of the film, namely Buddha. You see this one, the of Buddha at the essence. That I will connect that with Sufi. The film concept is a chosen human carry a spiritual message, especially from Sufi perspective. Even people chosen by Almighty do not necessarily have extraordinary learning experience in educational institution. The concept of the perfect human, I think from those from STEM, they know the concept of Insan Kamil. Those who gain enlightenment because of the spiritual journey and practice or haven't been chosen by God. The ability of the couple played by Yuan Wah and Yuan Q to understand the God-chosen figure in this film when wrapping it the holy light without the slightly injury. This is the very like pure energy in the Stephen Chow scene in that movie. And then this is like what we call in Bahasa or in Sufi, this is like perfect man. That's the person who has like chosen by God and have a very special power without any practicing religious or journey, everything that suddenly come to his body. The conclusion, the Chinese have become an essential part of the history of culture in Indonesia in the various fields. The integration process of Chinese citizens has given rise to cross-cultural encounters that have occurred to this day. Second, the influence of Chinese culture in religious life, especially in Indonesia, cannot be ignored, especially concerning the ritual attribute and religious symbol used by Muslims today. Third, and the penetration of Chinese culture in the film also play an essential role in the perception of Chinese identity in front of indigenous people in Indonesia. Thank you. Wassalam. Okay. Is it finished? Yeah, finished.
Thank you so much for sharing your passion. I can tell no one is falling asleep. That's very important at this time of the day. So we're moving to our next speaker, Krisharyanto Deta, who will talk to us on the eco-religious narrative of Indonesian Confucians for national and global citizenship.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for this beautiful opportunity for me to present my research about Indonesian Confucians. First of all, I want to thank the organizer. Thank you very much for inviting me. And then also, thank you also for the organizer to put me on as the last presenter, because with that, then there are many things that I don't need to repeat because my fellow Indonesian previously have presented, and it will be very important for me because
that gives you like the context of the Chinese in Indonesia, like the engagement between the Indonesian Confucian or the Indonesian Chinese with the Islamic conservative turn, for example. We get like some glimpse from the previous presentation. So here the title of my research, my paper is "We Are Indigenous: The Eco-Religious Narratives of Indonesian Confucians for National and Global Recognition." So as the background of my study here is that in Indonesia now, constitutionally speaking, the Confucian religion are officially recognized. So now we have 6 official religion in Indonesia, and Confucianism is the last one to be recognized. And also very recently, we have the indigenous religion, constitutionally recognized as not religion, but as belief, kepercayaan. So that's the way Indonesian governance govern the religious diversity. But the problem is, regardless the progressive changes after the Reformation era toward the status and rights of the Indonesian Confucian, some scholars argue that there has been like something called grassroots racism, meaning that, okay, constitutionally speaking, you are recognized, you have the legal standing as citizens, but in the social quotidian engagement, the social acceptance, the social recognition is still a challenge for the Indonesian Confucian. And this, some interrelated factors behind this grassroots racism is related to the issue of religion, politics, economics, and this all is intertwined. Like just a couple months ago, Yusuf Kala, if you know, the 2 times vice president of Indonesia, he is a national figure. He made a statement saying that Indonesian economic is mostly controlled by the Chinese in Indonesia. So whether this statement is true or not, the problem is such national figure, he is a big figure, he used the sentiment narrative against the Chinese by making the dichotomy, by perpetuate the distinction between the Chinese and then the Indonesian. So this is the problem that become the background of my study. So there is anti-Chinese sentiment, perceiving that the guarantee of Chinese rights and freedom is a potential danger of Chinese economic and political supremacy. And even in 2015, there is a Pribumi Party or Native Party established in the ambition of restricting the political and economic rights of the non-indigenous Indonesians. So here again, we see the dichotomy, the distinction between the Indonesian and then the non-indigenous Indonesian. So some scholars argue that the problem, the underlying problem behind this is a kind of ethnic essentialism that perceive that the Chinese Indonesians as essentially not indigenous to Indonesia, that they are alien, that they are foreigner, even though they are originated in Indonesia, like they were born in Indonesia, speak Indonesian language, they don't even know the Chinese language. But still, if you have the Chinese ethnic, then you are not indigenous to Indonesian. So in this paper, I try to take a look at how can we reimagine the Indonesian Confucian as part of Indonesian national pluralities, or in other words, how can we recognize them as indigenous to Indonesia? And through their Confucian eco-religious narratives, I try to take a look of several potential that this narrative bring. So I want to start with this, Confucianism in Indonesia. As we know that in Indonesia, Confucianism is a religion, and Confucianism become religion in Indonesia by such a process that we might call resistant appropriation, meaning that on one hand, they try to appropriate like the standard of religion constructed from the Western colonial, that religion should have a prophet, religion should have scripture, religion should have like monotheistic belief, and so on and so forth. But so in that way, when they appropriate this religion constructed standard from the Western, it seems like they are compliant to the colonial process. It's like they are subjugated. But some scholars also try to take a look at the agency behind that process of appropriation. That in that process of appropriation, the Indonesian Confucians always try to defend, to protect their Confucian particular tradition. So, okay, what you understand as religion should be like this and this and this. Okay, we have that also, thanks to the very extensive history of Confucian teachings or Confucianism. So these Indonesian Confucians, they can collect like the Confucian teaching Chinese tradition to construct what is religion for them. And this also could be said as this making process as a self-making on one hand, but also on the other hand as the process of being made by the process, especially with the colonial context. After the colonial period, there is also a long history of recognition of Confucian religion in Indonesia. Sometimes they are recognized, their rights is recognized, but sometimes also they are oppressed, they are repressed, as we have seen in the previous presentation for my Indonesian colleagues. So it is also important to note that the way religion is governed is strongly intertwined to the way ethnicity or race is governed. Like in the academic study, we know that both religion and ethnicity or race are constructed by the colonialism for hierarchical differentiation. Like your race is here, your race is that. And then in that differentiation, there will be always superior religion, superior ethnic or superior race towards the other race or the other religion. And that is what happened with the Indonesian Confucianism in Indonesia. So through that process of self-making and being made, I see that the result is the hybrid Indonesian Confucianism, that in one way they have the Confucian, the Chinese characteristic, but on the other, they also contextualize themselves to the Indonesian framework. So based on that, I try to construct the argument on how can we see the Indonesian Confucian, the identities of Indonesian Confucian as cross-cultural, not transnational identities. Thank you. So through the making process, the Indonesian Confucians arguably have indigenized themselves, have Indonesianized themselves, because they are in Indonesia with the cultural engagement very extensive with many cultural tradition in Indonesia. So they have indigenized themselves. On the other hand, also, maybe we can say they have been indigenized by the process or by the context. And this then result in hybrid practices of Indonesian Confucian. For example, in Surabaya, recently there is a Confucian priest who also practices kejawen. Kejawen is a Javanese indigenous religion. And this is actually a quite common practices in Indonesia, not only for the Confucian, but also the Christian, the Muslims. They sometimes have this hybrid, or sometimes people say syncretic practices of religion. Like on one hand, they are Christian, they are Muslim, but on the other hand, they still have that their indigenous religious tradition. And then on the other example, to see the hybrid practices of Indonesian Confucian, we could also see in the example, in the tradition of wayang potehi, or a puppet play in the Indonesian Confucian tradition, which originated from the tradition of siku or opera in China, and wayang, that is a cultural tradition of Java. And most of the stories being performed are from Javanese local culture, as it doesn't aim to preserve the ethnic essentialism of being Chinese or originated in China. Even Sternberg, for example, argue further that this wayang potehi performance have been a tool for the Indonesian Confucian as an integrationist tool. Like this is a way for them to integrate themselves to the Indonesian cultures, not to preserve like their they assume the so-called ethnic essentialism of being Chinese. And then, yes, so from this discussion, what I want to argue here is that the Chinese Indonesian are actually not people of another nation. They have been cultural to Indonesia. So like some Indonesian Chinese say that what they want to be is they want to be recognized as just another ethnicity, another culture in Indonesia. Like Javanese, like I come from Sumbanese, Sumatra, Sulawesi. They are also part of that. They are also part of the Indonesian national pluralities, not another nation, as have been stigmatized for long. So from the eco-religious narratives, I try also to take a look at how these eco-religious narratives produced by the Indonesian Confucians could provide some grounds for the recognition of the Indonesian Confucians as indigenous to Indonesia. So I take a look at this publication, Handbook of Humans, Forests, and Climate Change from the perspective on Confucian religion and the Confucian Jiangdao Pocket Guide. Both of these publications is part of the Indonesian Confucian engagement in the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. And there are some important points that I highlight from this publication that I consider as very important argumentation from the Indonesian Confucian. Like they mention some important foundational principles related to the discourse of ecology and religion. First, for example, they mention that the spiritual crisis as the root of environmental crisis. And this is very popular foundational argument in the study of religion and ecology. Why religion should take a role, why religion should be taken into account in facing the environmental crisis. It is because environmental crisis and spiritual crisis of human beings is strongly interrelated. And then also it mentioned the principle of interconnectedness of all living beings in the cosmic process. And they try to connect this argument that we are all interconnected. It is very popular in the study of ecology, in the discourse of ecology. And they try to connect that universal discourse to their particular tradition of Confucian, which is the teaching of harmony, by stating that the meaning of harmony in Confucianism is not only social harmony with other human beings, it is not only theological harmony, but it is ecological harmony with all living beings. And then last but not least, it is also very interesting for me that in this publication, they also consider seriously the significant role of indigenous people. As also, again, we always listen in interfaith forum, interreligious forum, or in the academic forum, when people talk about the environmental crisis, indigenous people now increasingly being mentioned as the significant subjects in the process of facing the environmental crisis. And the Confucian teaching, the Indonesian Confucian also take this as one important background to argue why ecology matters for them, why Indonesian Confucians should talk also about ecology. So based on this, I highlight that constructing eco-religious narratives that are based on their particular tradition to respond to the universal issue of a global citizen, it is a way to not merely seek recognition, but to bring their potentially significant contribution. So what they want to say is not that we are Indonesian Confucian, we are equal citizen, you have to recognize us. Not only that, but what they want to say is that we are Indonesian Confucian, we have ecological perspective, and we want to contribute, we want to engage with our particular tradition. So it is like they want to declare that rather than only seeking for or demanding recognition. So I perceive this Indonesian Confucian ecological engagement as part of their making process, the self-making and being made. And so in that sense, we can say that Confucianism is still in the making, as we all are always also in the making. Islam, Christianity, we are never essentially fixed as perceived by the ethnic or religious essentialism, because like decades ago, 100 years ago, we don't talk about environment, we don't talk about ecology. It's not our concern. But today, we are all talking about that. That is the process of our making as the Confucianism. So finally, I argue that all of this discussion disprove the essentialist view, perceiving the Indonesian Confucians are again essentially different to Indonesia. So I conclude, very short conclusion here. The way Indonesian Confucians indigenize or Indonesianize and ecologize themselves is part of their making process, and that provides ground to reimagine them, to recognize them as indigenous to Indonesia or to be part of the Indonesian national pluralities. So that's all from me. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much again for being really on time. So now we can move to our respondent, Emily Hertzman, who will engage with us too.
Thank you all so much for these excellent and interesting papers. And I'm really happy to meet you all, and I hope that we can start a little bit of a conversation here. So each paper is really distinct, but there's a lot of collective overlap that I'm seeing. So I'm going to kind of combine my comments. I've got some global comments, and then I've got some specific comments or questions to each author. So while Harry's paper, it deals directly with the BRI and the idea of kind of rising Chinese power, particularly economically, the other two papers address issues more related to Chinese Indonesian culture and the sort of evolving space of belonging in Indonesian society, for which, you know, Harry's paper also touches. So I am a scholar of Chinese Indonesian identities, subjectivities, culture, and religiosity. So obviously I was thrilled to read these papers, and of course all of the content is not unfamiliar to me. So these papers all reveal something which the popular and scholarly literature has been repeating in different ways really for the past 60 years or so. And this, of course, is about the problematic nature of Chineseness in Indonesia. So this can be viewed historically, legally, socially, psychologically. And various scholars have reached similar conclusions about the Chinese in Indonesia, or Chinese Indonesians, or Indonesian Chinese, or Chinese of or Indonesians of Chinese descent, whether they're considered Totok or Peranakan or China this, China that, or right. So all of these people have come to the similar kind of conclusion that these people are strangers at home, as one person has put it, or essential outsiders, trapped in a state of ambivalence. These are all quotes, trapped in history. So at once essential, intrinsic, and playing a huge role in the constituting of the nation, the culture, and the society of Indonesia, but at the same time always held just, can you still hear me? Yeah, always held just beyond the boundary of inclusion. Their full access always, their full access, or can you hear me? Sorry. Their full, is this on? Okay, sorry. Their full access or acceptance always delayed, deferred, or withheld, okay? And as each of the papers has mentioned, because of this notion of this essential foreignness. And all of the burdens of these sort of elaborations of their characterization as foreign others, as well as the stereotypes, essentialisms, and the kind of racist portrayals of people, and the sort of paranoid rhetoric of economic domination, right? So these things that get periodically used for scapegoating purposes. So in these papers, we see the same timelines, the same events, historical processes, facts, perspectives, changes in political regimes, and changes in the legal landscape of citizenship. And it's provided as evidence, and it basically leads to the same conclusion. And the conclusion is that while things are generally getting better for Chinese in Indonesia, it's still very fraught terrain, right? So the first point that I want to make, and my first question to all of these authors is, what is new here? What new process is happening? Does this lead to new evidence about the theorization of the status of Chinese Indonesians in Indonesian society? And sort of to attempt a beginning to answer this question, I want to suggest that this moment in which China is investing billions of dollars in BRI projects and non-BRI projects around the world is creating this ripple effect in which individuals, countries, key actors, and institutions have to evaluate and wrestle with the meaning of Chineseness. And in the case of Indonesia, this means turning up and dealing with the country's own essential ambivalence towards Chineseness. However that's defined, imagined, and being stereotyped in the given moment, and by which actors. So Krisharyanto, I think you really brilliantly talk about this sort of long history of sentiment making, which I think is a really useful way to framing it. And Harry, you talk about narratives and counter narratives, and I think that's a really powerful and interesting data set. And Kamaruzzaman, you talk about this like idea of cultural influencing. And there's probably many other ways to approach this. So just as a personal plug, my own research right now is about, which I'll be presenting part of in our following session of this conference. And I'm also working on some other work right now for a different conference. It looks at inter-ethnic spirit medium practices and how those are involved in kind of, as you had mentioned, the sort of indigenization of Chineseness in Indonesia. So this leads me to my second point. I think there seems to be a slight conceptual slippage between China and Chinese Indonesian and Chinese Indonesian culture, which I sense running through some of the aspects of these papers. I think that it's really important to make and to mark a clear distinction between these, just as one would mark a distinction between, African and African-American diasporas, communities, or other diasporas that have these kinds of hundreds of years of distinct settlement history. But the problem with the slippage occurs through some kind of shared or imagined Chineseness or Chinese heritage or ancestry. So this could be linguistic or religious or in terms of values, martial arts culture, business and economics, right? However, the subjectivities of Chinese citizens and Chinese Indonesian citizens is radically different. The trajectories of the national histories of the two countries and their various different political systems and society make it a really kind of risky comparison. However, as I say this, this is a pivotal moment in which the reckoning of what China is and what China investment will mean for Indonesia, like I say, is churning up the internal questions of the meaning of Chinese Indonesianness. Harry takes us into a kind of in-depth conversation about one aspect of this, okay, the possibility that China is essentially Islamophobic. Clearly, like the suppression of Uyghur Muslims it's not a phantom, it is a fact. There are many things happening, and the interesting narratives, however historically inventive that they may seem, produce their own logic, and it's easy to see how the various, how they serve various agendas. So, however, my question is to Harry is, do they matter? Do they, will they, have they, or will they have a tangible effect, for example, on accepting financial and technical investment for infrastructure projects? It's a very simple question, but the question is basically, what would the mechanism be in which these narratives could influence politics and key decision making? And as a follow-up, sorry, just a sec. And as a follow-up, how are these narratives about China influencing the ways that people conceptualize Chinese Indonesians in this specific historical moment, when Chinese-Indonesian relations are facing turmoil? Thank you. For Krisharyanto, who tells an entirely different story about Confucianism in Indonesia and the possibility and the possible role of kind of eco-religious narratives in the construction of a sense of global environmental responsibility, I have the following questions. And I apologize if this wasn't exactly clear to me in the paper, or I think your presentation just clarified it a bit for me. But what I want to know is, what are you defining as Confucianism here? So as you know, but I'm sure not a lot of other people in this room know, what Confucianism is not a simple question in Indonesia. It is itself already problematic, right? Because Confucianism is at once a misnomer, it is a distinct historical movement, and a set of formalization practices that took place that sort of sculpted Confucianism into a religion that could sit aside, alongside the other monotheisms in the country, right? It makes reference to a global, existing kind of global philosophy, a loosely held together collection of texts and ideas. And it's been variously allowed and disallowed over the years in Indonesia, right? So it was, Konghucu was listed as one of the religions you could choose, and then it was taken off the list, and then it's recently been put back on the list, right? But if we could just step back for a second, say a little bit more about Chinese religion in Indonesia, right? Or the religion most practiced and most identified in official documents for Chinese Indonesians. We have Tridharma, right, which is the mixture of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and then lots of people who are Catholics and Protestants, and then all of these things that we would clump into kind of like Chinese folk religion, which if they're not already represented in those, then they get somewhere else. So the point that I want to make is that how you are defining Konghucu or Confucianism will have some big implications for your study, because since Confucianism has been allowed, there's only really about 70,000 people who have listed themselves as, changed their status to Confucians, right? If you are also talking about Chinese Indonesians who practice what is misnamed Konghucu, and that includes everybody who's practicing Tridharma or going to Chinese temples, you're in the millions, right? And so I really need to know if you're making specific arguments about the kind of formally registered Confucianisms and the publications that are coming from their national organization, or if it's this bigger group, right? So I apologize if that was not clear. So I guess it doesn't matter either way. If you could take that and contextualize it into this complicated terrain of Chinese religiosity in Indonesia, you'll find a really interesting story to tell about the historical development of Confucianism, because the way that Confucianism got formalized and sculpted into this monotheistic tradition, in terms of actually mostly in East Java, in Surabaya and in Samarang, where you have Confucian halls and you've got communal prayers and prayer times, and you have like a corpus, right? This, as you mentioned, is distinct from anything that happened in mainland China. And this happened at the early 20th century and included reformers, from China, like Kang Youwei and the Singaporean rationalist and modernist Lim Boon Keng. So that's like a really interesting story there, okay? Sorry, I know I'm running out of time. I don't think that the argument yet about eco-religious narratives has been fully developed, but perhaps if you are using this bigger pool of people, you'll have a lot more material to pull from in terms of the ways that people are making that connection. Finally, I want to talk about Kamaruzzaman's paper a bit more. So I love the way that you center something which could be considered really non-sacred or frivolous, like entertainment, these kung fu movies, at the center of your question of cultural sharing and influencing. So a medium in which aesthetics and values told through stories of heroes and villains and this sort of like endless overcoming of obstacles can really be consumed and shared and loved by non-Chinese Indonesians, right? And Chinese Indonesians alike, and ultimately provide a sense of a kind of shared identification. So I would love to see this paper become a true sort of like film studies paper, and in which you analyze these films and their transnational circulations, and get kind of like in a more rigorously documented and analyzed way. So there's still, I found like quite a few stereotypes and essentialisms that have kind of like smuggled their way into your own paper. And so you can probably try to remove those and make a much more focused argument about the role of these transnational flows of entertainment and a kind of idea of this sort of like softer forms of cultural influencing, of diplomacy. So the idea of the idea, the image, and the imaginary makings of the ethnic Chinese in Indonesia within this broader global Chinese media sphere, I think is a really interesting thing that you could include more in your paper. And there's a literature about this which you could tap into. So just as a side note, and I might have to eat up a little bit more time here, but I think we're okay for that. So Kung Fu film distribution in Indonesia. I think you can historicize that a little bit because as you might know, during the 1960s, starting in the 1960s when Chinese religion and culture started to be criminalized in Indonesia and restricted, all of the Chinese associations were banned, right? Except for Yayasan Kematian, right? So funeral associations. And all of the newspapers were banned except for one, except for Singpo, right? And the Chinese film industry was also severely curtailed, but not completely. And you might not know this, but they allowed the release of one Kung Fu film per week. And so I just think it's interesting. It would be interesting to look at why even allow one? Why not completely, like what is this like kind of doling out of these Kung Fu films? So you could you could do some deeper history there and find out about this. So the question is like, why were these even allowed? Was it for, I don't know, appeasement? So the other question is about, how this relates to the presidential instruction number 14, like the prohibition on Chinese culture in Indonesia, and you can kind of go back to that original source and figure out. Let me skip a little bit. So yeah, I just want to encourage you to think more broadly about these transnational flows and the kind of national regulation of cultural forms over time. And I want to give like a little anecdote, which is just that when I was doing research in Singkawang, which is a city that has a majority Indonesian, majority Chinese population in Indonesia, I found that really having these Chinese cultural forms accessible for non-Chinese Indonesians was something new and exciting and cool and very interesting to watch. So I really had an affinity for what you're saying about, loving the Kung Fu films. So I'm thinking like, how can you mine this for more materials? So how can you analyze these as something that can create a kind of shared identification where people can create a sense of, like how can these films and a shared love of these films create this external source which has a potential to lessen, popular racism and stereotypes as they crop up, right? What is the humanizing effect for, residents, neighbors of Chinese descent to have this potentially shared appreciation for these kinds of circulating cultural forms. So finally, I'd like to say that in Indonesia, I think we all know it's such a huge country. There's so many dynamics, and this comment applies to everything. There's so many dynamics going on at the same time. There's multiple competing and contradictory processes taking place. So this includes the situation with Chinese Indonesians. There's on the one hand, like all these growing freedoms, and then there's other ways where things are closing down, for example, in terms of like the space within politics. And this is happening in terms of, moderate and hardline forms of Islam, secularization and Islamicization. So I think that it's really important for each of these papers to contextualize those processes within this larger within these larger dynamics that are often really contradictory, right? So that we can, because it's almost impossible to come to a conclusion about one of these processes. Finally, I think each of you could speak more specifically about, just to reiterate, the first person who discussed this morning, speak more about your methodologies and how specifically your methodologies related to your research questions and how that became the most appropriate way of looking at the, of collecting data to arrive at answers. And alongside that, potentially talk a little bit about your own positionality as Indonesians, as scholars, vis-a-vis your research subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. I would like to invite the three presenters to come forward. And yeah, to continue the conversation in order to celebrate Independence Day. So first, okay, yeah, I guess they can first engage with your questions a little bit, and then we'll put the floor.
Thanks for your input. I think I agree with your comment because you are expert on this. But as Indonesian, as an Achenese, as a Muslim, we do have like different feelings toward the presence of Chinese in our society. That's one major thing that I would like to emphasize. For us, Chinese, we can live with them peacefully, but separately. That one word in our like pribumi, the indigenous peoples in Indonesia. The Chinese peoples, for example, in Aceh, they have their own school. They have their own everything. It is hard to find the engagement with local. I think the different with Singkawang or other part of city or maybe in Medan. But for us in Aceh, for example, we live in a very harmony. But there is a little bit engagement in terms of cultural engagement, in terms of celebration, but we respect, like a mutual respect. That's what I call here is localized of imagination of Chineseness in our own culture in Banda Aceh. But that's only to take the one example. But for us, we don't have any problem with China. My parents, my father worked with Chinese, Toki, how to say in English, traders. And we always receive help from him in Medan. And we always also like engage with, in terms of, in terms of traders issue, but not in culturals. There is no such engagement in terms of culturals, like communication. We come to Chinese traders only for business, not for celebrating for any others that we deal with them. That I call here this localized, very local. You can't make like general perception that Indonesian perceive the Chinese one like this. But every province in Indonesia, for example, in Aceh, where we implement Sharia law, and also we had conflict more than 30 years with Indonesian governments, and the Chinese also take the benefit from this kind of situation in Aceh. So that only the example that I can give it to you. Maybe I return to my argument. We live peacefully but separately. That I think my response. The others I receive, I agree with you. I will follow what you just said to me. And last month I presented a paper at Tsinghua University on the anti-China among Muslims during the Jokowi era. So this is like my continuous projects on China in Indonesia. So last month when I was in Tsinghua University, I present about how the dynamic of anti-China among Muslim, and how the key roles, the super minister, Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, and he play a critical role in terms of helping Chinese government to invest in Indonesia. So now Indonesia start hate and angry with Mr. Luhut Panjaitan because everything's bad thing about China. When Luhut come and say no, that will be yes, and then no conflict. That first argument that I put last month in Tsinghua, that the role of Luhut Binsar Panjaitan. And the second is, I heard that the rumor that China's government, they have their own interest in next election, pemilu. We know that in Indonesia, there are two superpowers, China and America, who take this kind of opportunity next year election. So we are waiting now what kind of the Chinese steps and what kind of US or American step to the national election in Indonesia. We are waiting. We can't argue now because we are still waiting for next October next year, because the election will be taken in next year on October. Is it October? February. Oh yeah, October is inauguration. February. So that my second response. I think that's all. Thank you. I'll try to follow to your guidance. Terima kasih.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily, for your suggestion, your comments. I think this is very helpful for me to improve my writings. The first I want to respond is related to your point about how I can firmly differentiate between the China citizen and the Indonesian Confucian or the Indonesian Chinese. I agree that it is important, and in the first part of my paper, I think I mentioned that one of the background being the problem that I want to address in my papers is actually that point, that people in Indonesia, especially in the grassroots, they don't differentiate the Chinese citizens and the Indonesian Chinese, because in many issues, for example, yes, as my friends previously mentioned about the cooperation between Indonesia and China government, there is some rejection because of being anxious with the economic and political supremacy of the China government, but it has impact on the Indonesian Chinese because of the ethnic essentialism. Like, you have the Chinese ethnicity, then you are China. That's all. So that's the problem that I want to address. That another example that we can see the case of migrant workers from China. There are a lot of them coming to Indonesia. So there is strong rejection from the Indonesians toward these native Chinese who come to Indonesia as workers. But again, the narratives emerge in social media and everywhere is the anti-Chinese sentiment. And I think that ignores the traumatic history of the Indonesian Chinese in Indonesia. Because again, they don't, they cannot differentiate, they just take it for granted. So to repeat the point that I have mentioned in my paper, saying that in any times of economic and political instability in Indonesia, the Indonesian Chinese always become the scapegoat. Like in the case of Ahok and etc., we all see that. And then the next point is, this is also a similar issue, I think, about the Indonesian Confucianism, how I define them or limit the subject of my study. To be honest, this is actually the problem that I have been thinking. I have difficulties with this actually because of the complexities of the Indonesian Chinese. Some of them are Confucian. Some of them practices Chinese tradition but not Confucian. Some of them might be Confucian but not officially registered as Confucian in the identity card due to the New Order regulation. So it is very complex, and I think I need to look further at that issue. So for now, I think I just limit my study on those Confucian who are officially registered as Konghucu and affiliated to the Matakin, or the Supreme Council of Indonesian Confucian religion in Indonesia, because the ecological narrative that I have been mentioned, it is produced by the Matakin, the Supreme Council of Confucian religion in Indonesia. But I think I should continue to think, like, to look how then this discourse like that I have construct here have certain implication to the other, maybe I can call the non-affiliated Confucian. How about the Indonesian Chinese and etc. So yes, thank you for your suggestion about the methodologies, my own positionality. I think that is very important. Maybe just to mention a few, the background of reason behind of my writings. Actually, I work a lot on the study of indigenous religions in Indonesia, and I see the experience of indigenous religion and Confucianism in Indonesia is quite similar in terms of being excluded by the exclusive colonial construction of religion. And now there have been progressive changes, as you said, that the situation become better both for Confucianism or the indigenous religions. But I see we need more and more perspective on how then we follow up the progressive changes. And I see the environmental discourse as a very potential one. That is also the discussion that I always try to accentuate in my study, my writings about the indigenous religions. And at that point, I want to look at the possibilities of bridging the Confucianism and the indigenous religion in Indonesia and the other religious minorities like Ahmadi, Shia, Baha'i, and so on and so forth. And I think that is very important, the collaboration, the engagement between these, maybe we can call the excluded religious groups in Indonesia. That is very, very important, because the root of the problem, I think, is quite similar. It is the religious exclusivism. It is the identity essentialism related to religion, ethnicity. So maybe that's what I can respond. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily, for your input my research. Even though I familiar with research on a religious issue in Indonesia, but link it with the BRI or China in global China is it's kindly brand new for me. So this is my first project about how the global China and Indonesian religious life. So thanks for the opportunity of this event for me. And I straight to the point for your question about first, if I didn't misunderstand about your question, is how will the narrative affect the infrastructure project in Indonesia? The first is the narrative one that constructed by the hardline Islam is boiling the anti-sentiment in Indonesia. So specifically when it come the future election in 2024. So and another one is currently the Jokowi in the last his government era, he built many infrastructure like Bandung railway, railway, and the new capital city in Kalimantan. So when the anti-China sentiment is boiling up, all the infrastructure will face extra challenges for the government to finish up of the infrastructure. In other way, that the moderate Islam is really worried because this narrative is the second question. Is affect the Indonesian China because as my brother Frevish explained that in Indonesia we don't many people don't understand that this Indonesian China that is China origin or all things they see as China. So when the hardline Islam use the anti-China sentiment. This affect directly or indirectly to Indonesian China. And I just want to underline that the anti-China sentiment is used or weaponized by the hardline Islam is definitely they want to fight face to face or with the Jokowi because they see Jokowi as the representative of the China through the LBP. So when the hardline China's anti of BRI, anti of China, it means the anti of the current government. And the last one is the methodology. Why I use the observation, digital observation, because Indonesia has high internet penetration, is higher or above 50% of Indonesian people is connected to the internet. So the digital sphere in Indonesia is so active. So one is most dangerous tools in Indonesia is the family group WhatsApp. So when it's come to the election day, so many produce of information through the family group WhatsApp. The whole of fabricated information is using digital channel, YouTube, TikTok. The most current is TikTok and another one. So I think based on my perspective, this methodology is until now is can help me to answer the research question. And the last is my position. This is one the hard one, I think, to as a Muslim to research about the moderate and hardline Islam, that I still it is challenging to analyze with less bias. So how I keep a right to more proportional representation of how moderate Islam view this issue and how hardline Islam view this issue. And I think thanks for your view on this paper, and I will adapt your input, and your knowledge about Indonesian China is wonderful. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you all for your great responses. We're taking questions from the audience now.
Thank you again. I enjoyed all the papers. I'm actually working on the Masjid Chonghe in Surabaya and Java. So 1955 when the Bandung conference took place, Indonesians and the Burmese were all concerned about the presence of the Chinese in their countries. It related to the dual nationality law of China, and that concern continued until the 80s. The impression about the Chinese in Southeast Asia, and then people have written about it, Natia and Wang Kungu, continued, right? And the persecution of the Chinese under Suharto all the way to the 1990s created these kinds of identity issue, belonging issues, right? So you see from most of this Masjid Chonghe are 1990s and later, right? So it seems that the Chinese in Indonesia were trying to become Indonesians through Islam, through religion, right? And then, so how does that matter? I mean, all three of you are not overseas Chinese, so your perception really matters. Have they succeeded in presenting themselves as Indonesians by using Islam through the Masjid Changhua, right? Or is there still, because the Masjid Changhua also attracts non-Chinese to the mosque, right? It's not just the Chinese. So has that worked out, right? But at the same time, China has risen as an economic power. So these Chinese in Indonesia are also trying to reconnect to their ancestral homeland. So they are again stuck between Indonesia, where they use religion, and then China use their ancestral connections to it. So at present, how successful are the overseas Chinese Indonesians in playing the religious card, if we want to use that? I mean, so all the stories about Changhua that they're presenting are fake, right? I mean, this is not true at all, that Changhua brought Islam. But so have they actually succeeded in doing that? My second question is about Confucianism. As somebody who does Chinese religion, I don't know what Confucianism is. I mean, this is what Emily was trying to present. What makes a person Confucianist, right? And so if the Indonesians have categorized this as a religion, they seem to be doing what the Westerners did, categorizing religious practices under one kind of a narrative that doesn't make sense. So do the Indonesians have a definition of who is a Confucian in Indonesia?
So thank you very much for your insightful presentations. Much has already been said about methods. Emily pointed some issues to you, but I would like to revisit Ahmad's use of Fairclough's discourse analysis. Yes, I am quite not clear why you chose not to front critical in Fairclough's understanding of discourse analysis, right? Discourse analysis, right? Because I know that for Fairclough, it is critical discourse analysis. So why have you chosen not to front or to focus on the critical dimension? Because for me, it unpacks the power dynamics involved in the study. So why are you silent on the critical dimension of Fairclough's model for doing discourse analysis? Now the question is, given the nature of the Kungfu films that are watched in Indonesia, we see elements of mediated violence in these films. How does the Indonesian Muslim get to unpack and filter these levels of violence and come to, admire or embrace the values in those films at the expense of the violence that are mediated in the films? How does the Indonesian Muslim do this, in the context of the movies? And then to what extent does questions of agency or resistance or appropriation come into being in your analysis of the films? Yeah.
Thank you. We may take a third question.
Great presentation, congratulations. I have a quick question. As you know, Islam expanded by the military victories, right? Victories by the Arabs and Turks. And the only exception is in Indonesia and Malaysia, wherein the Persians, expanded Islam by trades and business, right? So there's a kind of Persian legacies there, like let's say Persian mysticism. Is there any contradiction between Persian mysticism and let's say Chinese Confucianism? Or is there any, synergy or contradiction? That's the question.
Thank you for your question about the methodology, where I put the critical Fairclough discourse. This is also input for me to make it more sharp, to giving critical touch in my paper. In the beginning, I used this approach, like knife as analytical to my paper, because I want to debunk the meaning behind why the hardline Islam using the anti-sentiment very very strong, and why the moderate Islam contrastly they war on the hardline Islam, and I found the meaning behind those narrative, because they have such as a DNA to fight each other since the beginning of the Indonesian history between the hardline Islam and the moderate Islam. And then the second one that I using folklore, I found that, I see that the hardline Islam is not totally so serious using the BRI in China, because all the things that can make the most gaining public support, they will use anything, including the BRI in China, to fight the current government and put their agenda, the agenda which is totally change the Indonesia become Khilafah countries. So until now, I think the folklore helped me to find those frame argument. But your question make me to rethink again to make it more sharp. So my paper it more be critically as folklore. Yeah, used to. Yes. Thank you for your input. And I think another question is for Mr. KBA and
Thank you. I would like to start by saying that the problem of Chinese identities emerged in Indonesia after Reformasi era. I think that's my arguments in saying that before that, we, correct me if I'm mistake, we never care about the issue of Chinese identity in Indonesia before Reformasi, during the Suharto era. That only one statement. And then the problem emerged after Gus Dur, you know Gus Dur, Abdul Rahman Wahid, gave fresh air for Chinese identity, and then their festival and symbol appear in public area by giving the instructions impressed in Bahasa Indonesia. President instruction, regulation, saying that China, there is the holiday for China and then the celebration for the, what we say in Bahasa, national holiday after the Gus Dur era. So we start talking about the issue of China, because you know when the Reformasi era, many of Chinese businessmen went to Singapore. They brought their money to Singapore. As I don't want to talk about that one. And now, in response to your question, I would like to give you 3 types of a person in China, very public figures. The one is Yusuf Hamka. Yusuf Hamka, he is a Muslim. He is a businessman. and you, and then he built the highway. People love him, never asking about his identity. Whether you China, you are Indonesian, you are our hero. But that's social media construct the identity of Yusuf Hamka. You can search the Google. The second one, Felix Xiao. Felix Xiao converted to a Muslim, now become the Islamic preacher. Very, very famous and Islamic heartland movement. Most of the Indonesians don't like him. Not because of his China, because of his argument, Islamic interpretation in public sphere against the NU. That is the second. I will take another one. Basuki Rahmat, Ahok. He was Chinese from Bangka Belitung, and then he was a governor. He was mistakenly mentioned about the ayah, the verses for Quran. And then there were huge demonstrations, almost 2 million against him in Jakarta. Finally, he was in jail for 2 years. But what? My point to show to you the dynamic religiosity identity in Indonesia. I will give 3 examples. No, I will finish. Please, this is how I would like to give you the example, the problem of identity, religious issue, political issue, and then some power issue, and how this it happened in Indonesia by picking 3% this one. Basuki Cahaya Purnama, you know him, and then Felix Xiao, Islamic preacher, and then Yusuf Hamka. That come to me to say that more Indonesian, less China, more Muslim. And then the second is less China, less Muslim, more Indonesian. And the last one is more Muslim, less China, more Indonesian. This is how they perceive their identity in the public area. We can't say that Basuki is wrong. For me, Basuki is right. I can't say Felix Xiao is wrong, because that depends on the socials, you know, socially constructed. I can't say they are Yusuf Hamka is good or bad, because this is what happened now in Indonesia in terms of the construction of religious identity in a public sphere. That only gives you the how we deal with the problem of Chinese religiosity in Indonesia after Gus Dur passed away, or after Abdurrahman Wahid give fresh air for Chinese to express their freedom into in terms of religious festival, holiday, etc., etc. I had no problem. As you see, I went to Chinese mosque. No problem with me, because in the mosque I never see China. I see my God. Yeah. No problem. No problem. No problem with that one. They are Muslim. Yeah, they are Muslim. We never ask identity in the mosque. We are the same in front of God. Yes, they melt it. Yeah, melt it. All of identity can be once in the mosque. Yes, yes. The last one is about the Persian. Persian, you know, Arash book written by Sheikh Nurdin Ar-Raniry, Bustanus Salatin. We in Southeast Asia have 5 books connect with Salatin. Bustanus Salatin, Tajus Salatin, Sulalatus Salatin, and the last one, I forget it, because all of these books in Southeast Asia or in Malay work influenced by Persian historiography. So maybe we can discuss this later. Thank you. No, you can. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so one question about who is the Confucian? And as I mentioned before, this is a very complex question to answer. And this is also the case with the other religion, especially like indigenous religion. Who is the indigenous religion? Because again, it depends on how we perceive the term religion. In the study of religion, for example, we know that there is the typology of the governed religion, expert religion, and the lived religion. Religion as defined by the governance or the regulation, religion as defined by the scholar, and religion. Yeah. 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 So that yeah. 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 Yeah.
Together, that can be the prayer. For I don't know what it is. I haven't memorized it, but it's it's passable. It fits that bill. But the thing is that what that is not what everybody else is popularly conceiving of and calling Konghucu or Confucianism in Indonesia, which you would call Chinese folk religion or Chinese popular religion or just Chinese religion, right? But there is a distinct tradition of Confucianism that got created in the early 20th century and got formalized, and they have Confucian halls and they've got communal prayers, but it's a very, very small portion of what is largely called misnamed, misrecognized as Confucianism. So not really. No, I mean, yes. No, I mean, there's lots of ancestor worship in Indonesia. But it has nothing to do with this Confucian tradition. So Sambayan Kubur, right? Sambayan Kubur, Kaji, it happens twice a year in Kalimantan. It happens, yeah. It's a huge thing, but doesn't have to do with the Confucian religion.
That you study, are they categorized as Confucian?
No, they're not. So I want to let you guys know I have a big quantitative data set about the Chinese religion in West Kalimantan. So there's 250 temples just in the city of Singkawang. There's over 1,000 home altars with spirit mediums like Tatung that get possessed. Of those 250 temples, only one is registered by Matakin. Only one is identified as a Confucius temple. And it's not a Confucius temple. There's not even a Confucian there. It just, they know the local representative, the Confucian place. So just like every mosque in Indonesia has to be registered by one of the big Islamic organizations, same goes with Chinese temples. So you can either be registered by Tridharma, or you can be registered by Konghucu, by Matakin, or you can be registered by one of these other organizations. So to give you a sense of that, for a population of 260,000 in Singkawang, there's 250 Chinese temples, and only one is registered as Confucianism. And yet nearly everybody thinks that all of those Chinese people are practicing what is called Confucianism, but they're not. So you can see what I'm saying. It's very complicated and problematic. What they are actually registered as is Buddhist, Tridharma, and Taoism.
So that's another official religion: Buddhism, Taoism, Tridharma.
So no.
Buddhism and Hinduism. Taoism is not.
No, Taoism is not. So Islam, Catholicism, Protestantism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, and Konghucu. And Konghucu is just recently. Yeah.
Okay, Tridharma.
Yeah.
So all those Taoist temples are registered as Buddhist. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No, because they're registered through the Ministry of, just recently.
Yeah.
There are many of indigenous religions. You may call that Confucianism or Buddhism. This is our own tradition.
Ancestors. That's absolutely true.
Chinese ancestors.
That's absolutely true. But when you go to get registered, because everybody knows in order to build a religious place, tempat ibadah in Indonesia, you need to have an official letter. And right. And to get one of those official letters, you have to get one of these big organizations that's officially sanctioned to register your place, regardless of what you're doing there. Right. Yeah.
It's just like in mainland China.
Okay. See, now we know it's the same.
Yeah, maybe just I just add a little bit just to give like the historical background about
But no Confucian no official Confucian temples in mainland China.
About governing religion in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, they have the paradigm that religion should have the monotheistic belief, should have scripture, should have prophet. There is no constitutional regulation that regulate this, but it was proposed in the early era of independence of Indonesian independence in 1952 by the Department of Religion. They proposed the definition of religion, that to be recognized as religion, you must have like monotheistic belief, and then written scripture, and then you should have a prophet. So all religions other than Christianity and Islam, to be recognized as religion, they have to prove like they have these three elements. And that is done by the Indonesian Confucian at the time. So the Confucian religion now is the result of that process of construction that I said in my presentation as self-making and being made. For example, they take like the teaching of the Confucius is our religious teaching. The concept of, if I'm not mistaken, the concept of Tian in Confucian, they take that as the concept of God for them. Although maybe they have like different genealogy, but that is the way they try to appropriate the category, but with their particular tradition. So in this regard, when the colonialism was coming and the Indonesian governance of religion inherited such construction of religion at the time was a tool to colonize, to subjugate. But then these people, they take religion as a tool for cultural survival. So they want to protect their tradition. So in order to protect their tradition, they have to name it, to label it. This is a religion, so I have to protect it. So that is the context that not only Confucian experience, but also the indigenous religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all experience this long struggle to get such recognition. So that's why at the first only Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam, and then Hinduism was recognized, and then Buddhism, and then Confucianism. And it always not like with a static process. It is very dynamic. Sometimes it is recognized, sometimes it is oppressed. It depends on the political situation in Indonesia.
In Indonesia, they have they mark a difference between what is religion and what is belief, right? Agama and kepercayaan, right? And so things that get labeled as kepercayaan or belief can get denigrated to a different category, which is what's happened with Kejawen and all kinds of indigenous traditions. And then you have to imagine that Buddhism and Hinduism also became monotheisms, right? That was quite a feat. So all of these Chinese temples that have various pantheons of gods could have conveniently a Buddha, a Guanyin statue put, to mask the presence of potential others there to create the look of monotheism. So yeah, sorry to take extra time.